Perfect. Appreciate it, buddy. Good afternoon, everyone. Really glad to have you join us for our 4th Friday Firepower Hour. My name is Paul Azzi, Cybersecurity CSC, along with a couple of my colleagues that are panelists to help out with any questions you may have. Make sure you ask your questions in a chat panel, and we've got Ryan Firth and Kevin Tracy to help along answer each and every one of your questions. If you need to be unmuted and you want to have a verbal discussion, let us know. We'll be more than happy to unmute you and have a verbal discussion as required. With that, let's jump into today's agenda. So we've essentially got 3 slides to go through, and then we're going to jump into the configuration and walk through essentially what we have highlighted here. So we're going to integrate the Firepower Management Center with Microsoft Active Directory. The benefit from this is to provide more context to who's on the network and not just simply an IP address. And with that, we will configure an identity policy. So an identity policy is required and be mapped to an access control policy in order to capture user information, but also to be able to apply a policy to leverage AD groups and users within specific rules within that policy. That's going to be pretty much the bulk of today's configuration. So this is going to go soup to nuts to show you these configurations, all the pieces that are required. Then we're going to look at some of the automation that we really recommend with Firepower or FMC from a scheduling perspective. There's a lot of options, and I find not a lot of customers leverage these automated tasks. Then we'll jump into configuration of platform settings. Once upon a time, this used to be called system policies in a SourceFire 5X and even in Firepower Firesite 5.4. And then in 6X, they became platform settings. So it's really important to understand what platform settings provide and briefly look at customizing dashboards. So this is my comprehensive network topology. This is my lab environment. However, we're not going to be using all of these components for today's exercise. It's only going to be a very small subset. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on Firepower Management Center, running 6.2.3. I'm running a virtual instance, and I do have a variety of different Firepower devices. I've got a virtual NGIPS sitting at in line between my corporate network, which is the 192.168.133.0, and my DMZ network, which is the 192.168.10 network. I also have a couple of firewalls. So I've got an ASA with Firepower Services as well as a Firepower 2110. So the ASA with Firepower Services is running 6.2 from a Firepower perspective, and my Firepower Threat Defense code is 6.2.3 running on my 2110. And before I jump into the configuration, feel free to shoot me an email. You can post that in a chat window as well. Any ideas to future topics, anything that you would like to spend some time with one of these sessions, let us know. And we get plenty of emails, and we try to include some of these requests into these sessions. With that, let me go ahead, close that, and jump into my console. So the first thing we're going to focus on is the integration of Firepower within Active Directory. So if I come in here, and I'm going to look at a few things to begin with. Let's go look at policies. Let's go look at identity policies. And just confirm I don't have an identity policy configured. There's none, right? So I got to configure at least one realm in order to add this to my identity policy. So I'm going to come back and look at this. The second thing I want to call out is if I go look at analysis, and I want to go look at users, and actually I just want to see users that are seen. Let's wait for this to refresh, and we'll see what this populates with. and there's nothing. There's nothing here, right? We're not seeing any users. So let me scroll down and look at the next one, which is user activity. And we may see something here. We may see something. If not, I'll generate some traffic and we may see something, even though we don't have an identity policy. So let me do this. Let me open up my Windows 7. So this is some of the VMs I was referencing in my diagram earlier. So I'm going to go on to this VM, which sits on the corporate. I'm going to open up a browser, and I'm going to go to an IP address in the DMZ via FTP. FTP should prompt me for username and password. I'm going to go to .11. So I don't care what the username is. I'm going to type in admin and blah, blah, blah for password. I'm going to type in test user and again, blah, 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 blah. The point behind this is not passing FTP traffic, but more to actually pass the credentials. That's really what I wanted to do. And what's going to happen if we go back and look at the user activity, let me refresh this and see if it comes up with anything new. And I'm going to look at under my users afterwards. So let's just give this a minute to refresh. There we go. So I'm seeing a user log on, anonymous. So this is a new user identity. Then it saw one for the admin, and then it saw one for test user. So when I hit the enter key, they took it as an anonymous. But the point is, I can see that these are new identities being created, but yet I don't have an identity policy. So one may ask, well, where is it capturing this information? If I go look at my access control policy, and I want to configure a rule, I'm going to pick my DMZ access control policy. Let me edit that. And I'm going to go in and modify an existing rule that's blocking URLs. And I want to block this for specific AD users or groups. I don't have anyone or anything to select. And actually, it actually says here you need to create an identity policy. So where is it getting all this information? Well, the short answer is if you're aware of the network discovery, let's go there and look at this real quick. We talked about network discovery as setting this up for capturing all of our internal IPs, and then it builds host profiles. Well, there's a middle tab we never really looked at, and that's the users tab. This is passive discovery of users leveraging any one of these clear text protocols. So notice that in my example, I used FTP. I typed in credentials, and because this went through my inline sensor, it captured the username with the IP address. So this is passive discovery, and passively discovered users cannot be leveraged in an access control policy rule. It actually has to be authenticated and authoritative. So let's go in and change the configurations to make sure we can configure this identity policy. So it says we got to go under system and under integration, and we have to create a realm. So the first thing I need to do is, before doing my realm, is I want to go configure an identity source. So Firepower Management System uses one of two identity sources. Identity Services Engine, which is the preferred method. We can leverage PXGrid and pull in username to IP mappings. And because of this username to IP mappings, we can actually apply a policy to individuals or groups, and then we could then leverage this mapping and enforcing policy because the network only sees IPs, and we don't actually see usernames going through say a web request. In my example, I'm going to configure the Cisco User Agent because I did not have time to stand up ICE, to be honest. That will be a future session, but for today, I'm going to add my Cisco User Agent. It is sitting on the 192.168.133.10 IP. That's all there is to it. I don't have to configure anything other than point to its IP address. I'm going to click on the Add button. I'm going to click on the Save button. And then that identity source from a Cisco User Agent, that's configured. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my User Agent, which is already installed but not configured. So if I come back on this host, let me confirm that the IP is in fact 192.168.133.10, and it sure is. So now let me launch my User Agent, and I'm going to add a Firesite or Firepower Management Center, which this is still referenced as the DC, which is the Defense Center. I'm going to add, and all I'm going to do is type the IP address here of my FMC, which happens to be 192.168.111.61. Click on the Add. Let me save this. And it's going to be in a pending state for about a minute. It's going to try to establish communication between it and the FMC and vice versa. And then it's going to come back and say it's available. It'll light up in green. And we're going to have a last update of when these were able to sync up. That's the first portion of this. Let me come back to my FMC and configure my realm next. So from here, I'm going to add a new realm, and I can give this whichever name that I want. So my domain, my Active Directory domain is called SSF Snort. So I'm going to call this my SSF Snort _AD for Active Directory. My option is either an LDAP server, so say I had an LDAP database running on a Linux host. In my case, it is Active Directory, and my domain is ssfsnort.local. And then to be able to pull information from the Active Directory, I got to type in credentials. So in this case, it's going to be the administrator. Does not necessarily need to have administrative rights because all we're doing is running queries. And then I'm going to type in my password. And let's test the AD join. It failed. Let me go in and add the directory name, and I'll finish configuring this and we'll do the test one more time afterwards. So the directory username is administrator at ssfsnort.local, and here is my password. And then my base distinguished name is DC equals SSF snort, DC equals local. And I'm going to actually copy that and paste that below. And I want to pull the member of attribute for the groups. Let me test this now. It's still failing. I've seen it happen several times. I'm going to let this sit, do an OK. And then it should come back and give me some additional tabs to configure. Then I'll come back and test it afterwards. Let me go ahead and add a directory here. So my IP address of my domain controller is 192.168.10.11. And my options here would be whether I want this over SSL, which changes the port and requires certificates, or if I wanted to encrypt. So in my case, I'm not doing any encryption. It's all clear text, so I'm just going to leave the encryption set to none. I'm going to OK this. And now I'm going to go to my realm configuration. And this is all the info that I've already typed in. Let me go ahead and save and then test this. Let me click on the pencil to edit. Let's come back here. And I'll test. And again, if this fails, I'm not too preoccupied with this. I'll come back and validate that the configs are good. So let me cancel out, and I'm going to turn this on. So that state was disabled. It is now enabled. And let's go back to my realm one more time. and there is a user download tab. I'm going to check the box to download users. So I'll come back and say there's an error message. Let me actually address that right now. So this is my domain name, ssfsnort.local, administrator ssfsnort.local. Let me retype my password. And the directory username. Let me type my password here one more time. And that should be all spot on. Let me save. And see if I can now come back in and use the user download. Well, we're not off to a good start. There's an issue with this. Let me try changing. Well, actually, before I do that, let me go back to my domain controller and make sure I do have the domain name set up accurately. So let me close my FTP. Let me close this. Let me launch my Active Directory users and computers. I want to configure that my domain name is accurate. So it is ssfsnort.local. I believe that's what I typed in. Oh, my bad. I have one extra S there. It should be sfsnort. That makes all the difference. We never fat figure now, do we? So let me test this now.
Hey, you got one more, Paul, the AD primary domain.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Having a second set of eyes is always a beautiful thing. There we go.
There we go. Good stuff.
Thank you. Let me save this. So we've incorporated some troubleshooting, guys, free of charge. We're not charging for this. So here's the user download, and perfect. I can see all my AD groups. If I wanted to include some of these groups and only use these groups and policies, I would select them from here and then add them. Or if I wanted to add all of these but exclude a few, I can do that as well. If you don't include or exclude, then all of these will be visible in my policy as options to add all these groups. And the only option is to specify when I want to pull these down and the frequency. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and start pulling them down onto my FMC. So from a firepower management system, the configurations are done to create this realm. I'm going to go back to my user agent to configure the integration with my domain controller. So let's go back to this agent, click on Active Directory servers. I'm going to add. Its IP is 192.168.10.11. Domain is ssfsnort.local. User is administrator. And the password is, well, you guys were hoping I would say that out loud, but I'm not going to. And I want to use this IP. Let's go ahead and add. Let's save. Again, it's going to be in a pending state for about 30+ seconds. So what I'm actually going to do to kickstart this, I'm going to stop the service and then save it and then restart that service. And it may take a few more seconds, but the domain, FMC is available and my domain controller is available, spot on. So now let's try a couple of things. I want to test this. So let me jump on a couple of systems and I'm going to log on. So I'm going to log on from this PC. That's joined to my domain. Let's go ahead and send my Control-Alt-Delete. Logged on username is VP user. And he was able to successfully log in. I'm going to log on from this Windows 2012 server. And his username is TRatchild. Successfully log in. And let me log on from this system here as well. And I'm going to log on as VP user also. As I'm logging on, let me minimize my VMs, and I'm going to go back and look at my analysis, user activity, and notice that I'm actually seeing more and more activity. The difference is they're not passively discovered now. Here's the realm. And with that information, if I go look at my users, anything that is configured in Active Directory, like a department, a phone number, and some metadata such as email address and information as such become available to me. And again, it's real easy to see these because they're identified as a realm and not as a discovered identity. So now that I've actually have these in a, I've got this contextual information, now when I build a policy that uses, say, VP user, I'm going to have his mapped IP address and be able to enforce a policy based on his username that's mapped to his IP address. Now, the configurations are still not done because we still need to configure an identity policy. Now, the fact that the realm is done, that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is to go in, configure the identity policy, add that to my access control, and then deploy that. So let's go to my policies, identity, and I'm going to add a new identity policy. I'm going to call this my SF snort identity. I'm going to save. And I'm going to let this load up. Did I click save or did I click something else? Oh, there we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and add a rule. So I want to use passive authentication. That implies I don't want users to type in their credentials. I want to be able to retrieve this passively by querying the database of the username and IP mapping. In order to do this, I need to add a realm, which I've already configured. So since I've configured a realm, let's go ahead and leverage that and point to this. Now, if we're not able to leverage and point or use this realm, we can then use an active authentication, which means now they get a portal. They got to type in their credentials. It becomes an active authentication request. So I could use this as a fallback. So I don't want that in this case. I want the user's traffic to go through without having like a cut-through proxy. In this rule, I'm going to call this my passive auth. Having a hard time typing today. Let's go ahead and add that. So this is the only rule I'm going to configure. I'm going to save this. Now that I've configured this rule, I could now go to my access control policies, and I'm going to pick out, I can do both, but let me start off with the first one, my DMZ access control policy. And I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, and here's that identity policy settings. I don't have any, and I did not have one earlier, but now that I've configured one, I could leverage this and do an OK. Let me save this. And then I'm going to go ahead and modify my Internet Edge access control policy and do the same thing. Let me edit identity policy settings. From the drop down, this will be available to me. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to say save, and then I'll be able to deploy this. When I click on the deploy, it's going to show me all my firewalls that it's able to push this policy to. So I've got my DMZ IPS. I've got my 2100 running FTD, and I've got my SA with Firepower services. Notice that these are the changes that are being applied to it. I'm going to check off everything. I'm going to do a deploy. And I'm going to give it anywhere between 1 to 3 minutes, depending on what platform this is being deployed on. In the meantime, Ryan, do we have any outstanding questions?
Let's see here. I don't believe so.
Yeah, I didn't see any either.
Cool, cool. That means we're doing a great job and getting some information out, and it's clear enough that no questions are required.
A+. If you can't tell, Paul used to be a professional instructor.
Used to be.
For this product. Well, that's true. He's a part-time instructor now.
Hey, Paul, you know, I'll give a quick shout out to user identity policy. So I've used user identity-based policies in 2 places that I've been responsible for firewall administration, and the transition over to user identity for firewall policies is a lifesaver, at least in the 2 organizations that I work for. To be able to just set a group policy that says this group has these permissions, and then when you have new hires that come in, and they automatically get assigned to the proper AD group, they automatically get assigned to the correct rules in the firewall. It's a huge time saver for environments that have a lot of moves, adds, changes when it comes to the firewall.
100% accurate, spot on. I mean, we're using AD groups in access control each and every day in a variety of different capacities, whether it's for VPN or whether it's for resources, regardless, right, whether you can come on a specific wireless network. We use these all the time, and more and more we're seeing these now in firewall rules. Absolutely,
absolutely. I'll give you one good use case is we'd have DMZ firewalls, DMZ servers, and our firewalls, of course, would be protecting access from internal to those DMZ firewalls or DMZ servers for certain users. So we'd have, say, a web dev group that we could assign permissions to, and that web dev group were the only ones that had FTP and SSH permissions to those DMZ servers. So just setting that up, now anytime we onboarded web dev members, they were added to the AD group and gained permission. And the way we did that was not all at once. You don't have to go through and add all your groups all at once. You can slow roll it. So you can put in a rule at the very top of your firewall that says, or wherever it's appropriate, that says this group gets these permissions. And then as you start building in your identity policy, then you can start looking for those connection events that have slipped through the identity cracks so that you can catch them and then re-add the identity rules as you need to until you've established a significant number of identity rules in your firewall policy.
That's spot on, right? So again, it's having visibility, and no one is going to block in that example, you know, on a per IP basis, especially when you have a dynamic IP allocation. It makes a lot more sense using user identity as opposed to an IP address.
Right.
So we can see here that actually this has deployed to my virtual NG IPS, and to be honest, this should almost be done on the other boxes. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go modify my DMZ access control policy for the sake of time, and I'm going to go look at a specific rule that I have, which is, you know, block, and I'm going to use this interactive block. So what interactive block rule action implies is you're going to get a block page. However, once you are blocked, you have an option to click on the continue button that allows you to proceed to that website. So if I go under users, under my realm that I've configured, and here they all are. So here's all the AD groups, and if I scroll down to the bottom, all the users are going to be listed here as well. So I could go ahead and pick VP user if I wanted to. I could go in and pick a specific group if I wanted to, but this allows me to build a policy based on all these different objects. So let me fast forward to the next page, and here's Tia Ratchild, the user that logged on to that 2012 server, and here's VP user. And I normally would not be using individuals. I would be using groups, but for being able to relate to these are the users that are logged on with, so we can actually have a visual that these are the users that I want to have an interactive block session with. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And again, this is for sports, motor vehicles, and shopping categories. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I will have to redeploy this one more time, but I will only be deploying this to my virtual NG IPS, which will be about 1.5 minutes to deploy. And while that's going to run, I'm going to go back and look at a couple of things. Number one is, let me just cancel that from here, and let's go look under the analysis, and I'm going to go back and look under users, and I'm going to look under active sessions. Then I'll go down that list to see what are we going to see that we have configured the realm, and we have a couple of people that have logged on. So we can actually see that some people don't require authentication, like the VP user. It's passive authentication. I can see his IP address, right? I can see the realm that was used to discover that and get more information about him, and he is on the network. So is T. Ratchild, and here's the IP that he's logged on to. I can now come in here, and user activity is, I won't say very useful, because this is showing you if you're creating an account, if an account is updated, if you're deleting accounts. So if any type of, and typically it's going to be network discovery. I'm discovering users, whether it is passive or whether it is through querying the AD server through the realm configuration. And then users would be a list of all individual users. So while that's running, let me come back here and look at my task. And this will take another about 45 seconds to be completed, at which point I'm going to go back to the systems that both T. Ratchild and VP user were logged in, and we'll try to access a couple of those sites that fall under sports, categories, shopping, URL categories. So this should be wrapping up in about 10, 15 seconds. And again, while we are waiting for this, if y'all have any questions, or better yet, if y'all have any ideas, suggestions for upcoming sessions, please let us know. It'll be our absolute pleasure to incorporate any and all of your ideas into a future session.
Paul, you have a $500 Amazon gift card for the first suggestion, right?
Actually, it's $1,000. Why are you being so cheap, buddy?
I heard that you're being recorded.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, that's right.
Man.
Hey, Paul, this is Kevin. I know I'm a panelist, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
When you do a large Active Directory group or maybe even individual policy, have you ever seen where that takes a load? Do you have any visibility into performance for this feature, or is it pretty benign?
No, that's a great question. This information is actually queried from your firewall, and then it's going to be cached. Any new user that's going through the firewall, if it doesn't have that, it's going to query the FMC. So it does maintain a list of users to IP mappings, because you would not want your firewall to be querying your FMC for every connection attempt being made. So there is going to be somewhat of a load. How big of a load? It's really not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big load. So two factors: the size of your AD deployment and the size of your firewall. Did that answer your question, Kevin? Kind of, sort of?
Yeah, that did.
So this completed the deployment, so now I can come back to my VMs. So again, let me do this real quick. Let me do a who am I? And I'm logged in as Piazzi. That's the wrong one. I want to go to my domain. It's a good thing I did that who am I, because I would have been, why am I able to go to that website? So who am I? And this is VP user. So let's see if this takes effect. So I'm going to try to go to a couple of sports sites. Then I'll try to go to a couple of shopping sites and see what happens. This is a great time to update Firefox at the same time. So there's never a bad time to update Firefox.
And also a good segue, I'm glad you chose the categories that you did, because I've heard too many horror stories about people in IT, or maybe even people in sales that have tried to demo, hey, look, we're blocking the porn category. Look, let's go to this porn website to see if it works. And sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that. I've learned that lesson the hard way a long time ago. A long time ago. There we go. Access denied, right? Being blocked, but it's an interactive block, so you can click on the continue button. And as I do that, let me minimize this. Actually, this will load. But what I want to do is come here to my connection events. And now that I've got this identity policy mapped to my access control, when I'm looking at my connection events, the native workflow does not display user information. Let me repeat that. The native workflow does not display user information. You have to click on the table view. So from here, let me go to my connection events. I thought I clicked on it. Maybe it's just taking its sweet time to load.
You're running this thing totally on your laptop, right, Paul?
Each one of these VMs is running locally here on my laptop. That is a true and accurate statement. Yes, sir.
That's awesome.
So while that's going to load up, which I'm not real patient right now, but let me try loading it from here. So I've got two tabs competing, so let's see which one loads first. You know, I'm going to ping Roland to try to get a physical FMC. I think I'm going to need a 4500 for my lab. Actually, while this is waiting, let me close this tab here. Maybe that'll speed it up. While we're waiting, I'm going to go back and test my other Windows 2012, which is where I had T-Ratchild logged in. So let me click on that and pull that up. Well, I actually see the analysis came up. Perfect. So again, I'm not going to see the user information from here unless you click on the table view. So when you click on that, it's going to add a user info column. And the point I want to make is you will actually see the interactive block. Here it is. And then once this loads up with the user info column, I'm going to be able to see that that was VP user coming from 192.168.10.15. And actually, if I scroll over to the very far right, I will see the domain or the URL that he was trying to get to. So while that's going to refresh, let me go to my Windows 2012. Let me go ahead and unlock that. And open up a browser. And let's say Firefox is going to want to upgrade and update here. Because it's a Friday afternoon, I'll bet you it's going to want to upgrade. And sure enough, it is. Let me minimize that and come back here. Actually, this is still spinning. While it's spinning, let me move across. Did it just refresh? No, it's refreshed but did not load up. It refreshed before loading the page. So now let me go back to my Windows 2012. And he's going to try to go to MLB.com, which is another sports site, Major League Baseball.
Paul, it's just bad security. You should be updating your Firefox.
I should. But this server only comes up every blue moon. If it was up all the time, I probably would be. But again, same thing, MLB.com, I click on the continue button, and now MLB will load up, and he's good to go. Let me minimize this, and I should be seeing that information here as well. And this is just taking way too long to refresh. Anyone who's got a VM, I feel your pain. And again, it's not normally this slow. You know what it is? I normally don't have all these VMs running simultaneously either. It's just a lot of horsepower. So actually, in the name of time, I'll come back. I just clicked on table view of connection events, and the point is to actually see the username with the connection event itself, but we'll come back to this. I want to jump on to something else, and we'll come back to this afterwards. The next thing to talk about is automating some tasks through scheduling, which I really think is an important aspect. So I'm going to go to my system. I'm going to go to Tools and Scheduling. Let me open this up in a new tab. And you'll notice this looks like a calendar once it loads up, and I've got a few things that are pre-configured. I'm going to call out some really important things that you should be backing up. So backing up scheduling. So I'm going to click on the Add Task, and these are all the different jobs that we could use and leverage. Backup, to me, is one of those important things that we typically don't do until something happens and realize we got to restore this. And I would encourage you to make this recurring, and maybe on a weekly, maybe bi-weekly, but whatever that cadence is, set something up. And in my case, I'm going to leave it to every week and maybe have this run on a Saturday and maybe run at 11 p.m. at night. And call this my backup. Now, when I go to do this, notice that it says no backup profiles exist. So that means you got to tell where do you want to back up to. So let me click on this, please create a backup profile. So I've created an external repository via SMB file share on a server. All I got to do is specify now it's some additional parameters with this backup profile. So this should load up in a few more seconds, and you'll notice that I'm actually going to have a repository or storage location reconfigured. I'm going to call this my weekly backup, and then if you don't care about your events and all you care is about your configs, then you don't have to check up the backup the events. But in my case, I do want to have my intrusion events, my connection events, my file and malware events. So at this point, I can save this as a new job or as a new backup instance. And now that this has been configured, let me go ahead and close this.
Hey, Paul, so we don't let you off the hook, I got a second question.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, you want to do this if you have a single FMC. If you have the HA solution, how does the philosophy change? Obviously, there's never a backup that isn't good. But
correct. So the good news is you're always managing the active or the primary, and all the configs are then synced with the secondary. And when you actually have two FMCs, when you jump on your Firepower, whether it's a VM or an appliance, and you do a show managers, it'll show you both. It'll show you the primary and the secondary. And that's important to note because it's actually going to be sending events to both boxes. And we can only do HA with appliances. VMs don't support HA natively. So from an event, you get that automatically to both boxes. And on the policies, it's synced from the primary to the secondary. If the primary goes down, you still have everything on the secondary that now becomes active. So I would still like to have a backup because you never know, but it's not as important as say you only have one appliance or one VM.
Yeah, that's what I usually see with HA things. You want to do it, but what you find if you're not, since you have HA, you won't be real disciplined. And when you go look for a backup, it's going to be 3 versions ago or something of that sort, and then it's kind of a mess to restore it. You got to go through a lot of things. But
yeah.
if you can get it on a schedule, you know, and do it daily or weekly, then that's pretty good, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So what I did is I refreshed this by going out, coming back in, and here's that weekly backup profile that I created. And the rest is just all the same thing. Let me call out a couple more things that are really important. When we talk about downloading the latest update, to me, it's not just pulling down the software, but it's pulling down the vulnerability database, the VDB. Firepower Recommendations leverages this VDB or vulnerability database in conjunction with the intrusion policy to map or recommend which intrusion rules to enable and or to disable. If you're running an older VDB because you're not downloading and applying these VDBs to your FMC, you could have stale vulnerability information and not the most up-to-date that's going to be leveraged by your Firepower recommendations within your intrusion rule. Let me repeat that one more time. If you're not updating your vulnerability database on your Firepower management centers, you're working with older, not newer vulnerabilities, so the Firepower recommendations will only leverage the vulnerabilities from the vulnerability database. So how do you know which version you're running? If you go to Help, and if you go to About, it'll tell you. And I'm running the most recent VDB, and that is number 300. And this was downloaded and installed, actually came out on July the 3rd. And to me, this runs automatically. So I can set this to run, and in my case, I make this recurring, and it runs on a weekly basis. And then I have another job that installs this for me on a weekly basis. Now, it doesn't come out on a weekly basis, but it doesn't hurt to have this run every week and run and query, because if I run this on a Saturday and then I don't run this for another month, but it happens to come out the following Tuesday, I'm going to wait 3.5 weeks before I can download this VDB, and whenever my schedule is to install it. So in my case, it downloads on the Saturday, and it tries to install on the Sunday. Just a key note, when you're installing the VDB, when you create a job to install the VDB, it will give you a warning that says, hey, be careful, because this can interrupt traffic. It may interrupt traffic as you install this on your FMC, right? And here's this pop-up. The scheduled task may interrupt traffic inspection. So again, when you're configuring anything and everything, know the repercussions of this configuration. Let me move on to a couple more things. So I'm going to go to System, I'm going to go to Configuration, and from here, notice that I can configure my Defense Center or my FMC settings. So from here, I could put a banner, I could put an ACL from where we can log on to. This used to be called the system policy. And when you configured a system policy, you had an option to specify this is for my FMC and for my Firepower appliances, my Firepower instance, or whatever we had running Firepower. So now this has changed so that the system configuration is only for the FMC, and if you want to configure this similar configurations, then this is done under my platform settings. So one of the key things from here, guys, is always think about time synchronization. With security or with anything else for that matter, we got to have consistent times. So from here, I can come in and have the FMC point to a NTP source, whether that is the cloud, whether this is an on-prem. In my case, I'm going to the old SourceFire NTP source. And then I'm going to go to my devices, and there is a platform settings. So I'm going to wait for this to load up. And when I configure a platform setting, I notice I do have, ASA with Firepower services. I've got a virtual NG IPS. I've got 2110. I've got FTD. This is a 5512, which is in maintenance mode. And I do have a virtual FTD. The point is, I've got a mixture of Firepower and FTD. So now when I go to my platform settings, the configurations are going to be slightly different for each one of those platforms. So if I pick my Firepower platforms, it's going to be a smaller subset of what we can do with FTD. So again, an ACL of accessing the Firepower platform. Again, the most important part for me is time synchronization. So make sure that if your FMC is going out to pull its source from, its time from a source, that all your firewalls are pointing to your FMC so that we have a standard and standard time across all events. So let me cancel this out, and let me go look at my FTD or Firepower platform settings. And actually, if we go to create this, you'll actually see it's called Threat Defense. So Firepower would be the not the unified code, but just Firepower services. And then Threat Defense is Firepower running on 2100, 9300s, 4100s, or if you re-image your ASA to run FTD. And notice from here, you're actually going to see some additional configurations like fragment settings, something you'd actually see on a firewall, ICMP, so I want to allow or block or deny, or, I'm going to permit ICMP. Let me create an echo reply object as an example, right? So echo reply, call it whatever you want, and then add that as a, here's what we're going to permit on, the following network and so on and so forth. So the point is, I can go in here and configure this, which is not really available on just Firepower. And again, time synchronization, making sure it is coming from your FMC. By clicking on policy assignments, this is where you're going to see that the only thing available to me are my FTD-capable devices that are running FTD. And when I click on my Firepower platform, the only devices that are going to be visible are going to be devices that run the Firepower software, but not the FTD software. With that, let me come back here and see if actually we're seeing the user perfect. That's what I wanted to see, right? So now when I went to table view, I can see the initiator user. Again, because I've got the admin who's already logged on, VP user, and TRAT child. The fact that it says user bypass, I never close my browser, so it's probably refreshing, and because I clicked on the bypass, it's going to bypass me for 10 minutes, the default time, before prompting me a second time to click the continue button. And again, this is all the different users that we're providing context to over and above the IP address. Last thing to talk about is customize my dashboards. So this is pretty straightforward. If you haven't had a chance to play with this, it's pretty cool. The reason I say this is every Firepower Management Center has a database. Within that database, it has different tables, and the different tables have different fields. Example, I've got a table for intrusion events. Well, I'm going to have, the source IP, destination IP, impact flag, source port, destination port, the rule action, the date, the time. All those are fields within that table, and the intrusion event is one example of many, many different tables. So the reason I bring this up, all this data is in the database. All I'm going to do with my overview and my dashboards is come in here and handpick what data I want to see, as well as show you some cool stuff that you can configure. So these are pre-configured for me. Nothing says that I can come in here and change the top operating system scene by clicking on this little cog, and now I can come in here and this is a preset implying it's pre-configured with everything that you see, but I can say, you know what, I want to look at the host table, but maybe not the OS name. Maybe I want to see the current user. Maybe I want to see the host type. Is it a Windows? Is it a whatever that might be? Show me the net BIOS name if you're able to capture that information. So I can change this on the fly from any one of these, but at the same time, I can create my own tab. I'm going to call this the Friday Firepower Hour tab, and then I'm going to go in and add widgets. So all of these are different widgets. So I can pick a pre-canned widget for me. So let me go ahead and let this refresh. And I believe there are like 16 or 15 widgets that you can pick from. And from here, if you really want to have the ability to customize, it's called the custom analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. I'm going to say I'm done. And you can add as many widgets, as many tabs as you want. And you can actually make this as your preferred page when you log on. So I'm going to change this from intrusion events to maybe I want to look at audit logs. So I want to see who is logging on to do changes. So maybe, date, how quickly, frequently are we doing changes, and show me the top 20 as an example. I don't want these to be in a red color if I want to. Maybe make this based on not the date, but the username. Who's making this from a user perspective? So this is one example of using a custom analysis. Here's another one. Maybe I want to come in here and I want to look for, I don't know, scanner results. If I'm going to run an Nmap scan, which we talked about in a previous Firepower Hour, so based on a target, an account. So now if we have correlation policies that run remediation with Nmap scans, come back and show me the Nmap scan results based on account. So again, this is just visually configuring anything that is found in the database, which these are all the different tables. And each one of these will have a different corresponding field that we could leverage. So that allows you to customize these to your heart's content, from the top, the bottom, whatever that it is that you're trying to capture and then display on your screen. With that, let me pause for a minute and quickly recap. We spent most of the time today, guys, talking about how to integrate FMC with AD. We talked about configuring a policy, and we demonstrated all the above. Went through some automation, some benefits for automation. Talked about the different platform settings and where these came from, system policies previously, and we wrapped things up with customized dashboards. Any questions, any comments before we call this a day?
We've got a gentleman looking for the SourceFire User Agent. By the way, it's now called Firepower User Agent, I believe, in some of our documentation. But I'll get that reference and shoot that over to him if you want to wrap, Paul. But other than that, that's the only pending question we have.
Perfect, perfect. Really appreciate this, guys. Hopefully it's been a good use of your time. Cisco values your security investment, and we're putting these on for you guys so you can better understand our products, better consume them, better integrate, and share with us ideas for future sessions. We are more than happy, and we take all your comments very seriously. Just share that with us. With that, I'll be quiet. Have yourself a wonderful weekend, guys. Ryan, Kevin, thank you, my brothers. I always appreciate your support and help.
Yeah, thank you. Great job. I appreciate my customers here from Florida as well. Bob, Brad, and Michael.
You bet. You bet.
Right.
I'm seeing a few guys that I recognize as well. Some of these guys, we actually had meals together at Cisco Live last year, and you guys know who you are. You're based here in Fort Worth. Appreciate Eric and John being here. And actually, Paul, Mr. Barrick, I'm going to see you next week in Baton Rouge, buddy. All right, guys, with that, I'll be quiet, and thanks again. We can stop the recording.